Hello, coming to you from the joyous city of board gaming, Omaha, Nebraska. Welcome to the Out of the Dust podcast. I'm your host, Happy Bryce. Tied into the popular recurring Out of the Dust geek list on Board Game Geek, the Out of the Dust podcast is a bi-weekly podcast that is focused on re-exploring games we play that we hadn't previously played in a year or more. Why did the game get dusty? Why did you decide to dust it off? How does the game compare to how you remembered it? Are you likely to play it more often in the future? These are the questions that we're interested in examining on Out of the Dust. This week on the podcast, episode 69. On the Out of the Dust comment, I'll bring SteamRollers Out of the Dust and a contributor will dust off Barrage. On the reaction segment, I'll preview a trio of IP licensed games and re-implemented game systems. On the What I've Been Playing segment, I review Terramara. On the obscure Bryce game segment, I review Love Formula. And we wrap up the episode by continuing the BGG and my own top 5 countdown in 2015 with the number ones on the list. This week on the Out of the Dust segment, I'm going to tell you about SteamRollers, the train-themed roll-and-write game from publisher Stronghold and designer Mark Garretts. It's often referred to by fans as the Age of Steam dice game because of its similar mechanism of delivering colored cubes to same-colored cities. Since I'm a big fan of the Age of Steam family of games and count them among some of my all-time favorites, SteamRollers was an easy backing decision when it was on Kickstarter several years ago. I played it several times when it was fulfilled, but it's been 2 years, 1 month, and 5 days since I last played it. Most of that is probably due to the Steam and Age of Steam monthly demos I was doing before COVID, which put continued exploration of SteamRollers on the back burner. But I was very pleased to see SteamRollers become the latest Yucata offering online. Regrettably, there is not much of an online presence at any of the major sites for any train games, so the addition of SteamRollers fills a hole in my recent play repertoire. I quickly discovered, though, that if I ever knew the secret to success in the game, I've evidently forgotten it if my dusting off play was any indication. I got smoked and it wasn't even close! I think I got too distracted with building routes and not actually delivering anything until the end. I was hoping to make several long deliveries at the end, but that idea did not come to fruition. I'm definitely looking forward to playing it again soon, though, and I might break my physical copy out for a solo play in the meantime. This had a pretty good solo mode, as I recall. Let's see what a contributor brought out of the dust. Graham Dotzy, username Godow, brought Barrage out of the dust. Barrage from publisher Cranio Creations and designers Tommaso Battista and Simone Luciani made a big splash when it released last year, though not all of the initial reception was positive, as Cranio Creations had one of the biggest Kickstarter fiascos of the year with the production of the game. In any event, Graham last played it 1 year, 6 months, and 27 days ago and currently rates it an 8.5 out of 10. He writes, I last played Barrage as a demo and I was completely taken in by its elegant design and tactical complexity. I eagerly awaited the Kickstarter, but when I received it, it was basically unplayable due to some production errors. Fast forward to now, and I have finally received the update pack and quickly got it to the table. It is a really clever game. The player interaction and the integration of theme really are top-notch. Now that I have working parts, hopefully it won't be so long between plays. Graham also brought The Edge, Dawnfall out of the dust. The Edge, Dawnfall is a recent Awakened Realms Kickstarter from designers Mikhail Orax, Krzysztof Pekorski, and Marcin Swarkot. Graham last played it 1 year, 7 months, and 2 days ago and currently rates it a 6.5 out of 10. He writes, another game that I got to play once before having to wait for a Kickstarter delivery. What with the COVID stuff, it has only been the last couple of weeks that I've been able to actually get my gaming group together to play. It is a nice skirmish game with simple rules and an interesting resource management aspect. I don't get to play two-player games that often, though, and the size of the box makes it impractical for transporting to gaming events. Thanks for the contributions, Graham. I'm going to have to disagree with your use of the word elegant to describe Barrage. It was one of my top 10 games of the year last year, but elegant is just about the last adjective I would use to describe this complex game. As for The Edge, this was a game I had forgotten about because Awakened Realms wasn't on my radar when it was funding or fulfilled. But your write-up caused me to look into it more, and there's a lot about it that appeals to me. I'm going to add this to my wish list and see about getting a copy on the secondary market sometime. Reaction segment time. This week on the reaction segment, I'm going to run through a trio of recently announced re-implementations based on existing IPs. First, we have Marvel Villainous from Ravensburger, designer conglomerate Prospero Hall. This was initially announced several months ago, but they wrapped up teasing the last of the villains a few days ago, deciding to include the most ridiculously named Killmonger in with the initial lineup. Because I'm pretty sure this will just be an initial lineup. The IP is a great fit for the system, and there's a ton of material to mine. I'm disappointed that the game isn't going to be compatible with the Disney line, but I wouldn't be surprised if there will be some kind of conversion pack in the ultimate future. I'm more of a DC guy myself, so I'm not planning on rushing out and getting this when it releases, but I'm tentatively interested enough in the tweaks to the system and the lineup of villains, even Killmonger, that I'd try if a friend grabs it, and I'd probably grab it myself if a great deal comes along later. Speaking of Marvel, we also have an announcement of Marvel Splendor from publisher Space Cowboys and an as-yet uncredited designer. I love Splendor, but as themeless as the game is, I'm kind of surprised it hasn't been rethemed before now. I don't expect the Marvel theme to be particularly strong, but I am more interested in this one than the Villainous game. Mechanically, the new endgame triggers and victory conditions have me intrigued. There's not a lot of hard information about what this might entail yet, so it might just be a re-implementation of one of the Splendor expansion modules, but I'm hoping it goes deeper than that. That's a great module for Splendor, and I'd love to see it expanded upon even more. Finally, we have the Star Wars Escape game for the Unlock series of games, also from publisher Space Cowboys and designer Cyril Demaig. I'm not a fan of the deduction genre in general, so I've never gotten into any of the escape room style games. But if I were to play any in the future, I like how the Unlock series handles things better than others. So this Star Wars Escape game actually piques my interest. I don't think I'll buy it myself, but I know plenty of people who probably will, so I'm planning on inviting myself over for a session if possible. I'm particularly interested in seeing which direction they go in story-wise. Are they going to stick with something in the established canon? Maybe something in the non-film expanded universe? My personal preference would be something completely new, preferably in the underutilized Old Republic era, that just uses Star Wars as a setting. That would be cool and would tip me over to the purchase side of things. This week on the What I've Been Playing segment, I'm going to tell you about Terramara, the new worker placement game from Quind Games, the Italian couple of designers consisting of Achitaka, Flaminia Brasini, Virginio Gili, Stefano Liberto, and Antonio Tinto. It's a lot of guys working on one game, and I'm always interested in cases like this, how the collaboration works exactly. In any event, some of those guys are responsible for some very high-profile games in recent years, including Lorenzo El Magnifico, and one of my all-time top 20 games, Grand Austria Hotel. So the designer pedigree and the promise of a lovely Quind Games production was certainly enough to pique my interest and pre-order the game online. The theme of this one has players doing some civilization building with the Terramara people of 1500 BC northern Italy, an attractively obscure theme for me. Here's how it works. Players are members of the Terramara civilization, represented by a character card. This card grants the player a variable player power, and once during the game, the player can age their character to get a different variable player power related in some way to the first. Players use a chieftain meeple and several tribe member meeples to take worker placement actions. These actions are printed on modular tiles that are randomly selected at the beginning of each game. Each row of actions corresponds to one of the rounds of the game. Chieftains can only take current round actions, but the tribe member meeples can take actions on future round rows, with the catch being that only meeples on the current round row get returned at the end of the round, so future round meeples get locked up for a while. The worker placement spots grant players some combination of one of the 4 basic resources and or one of the 4 upgraded resources. The upgraded resources are printed on the backside of the basic resource token, and some action spots actually refine the basic into the upgraded. The resources are used to acquire cards, which are worth points and which players use to build a tableau of immediate, passive, and end-of-game effects with. A few worker placement spots and some card effects advance players on one of 3 tracks. The culture track dictates how many cards a player can choose from when they acquire one. The traveling track grants immediate bonuses and end-of-game scoring objectives. The strength track dictates which players a player can share a worker placement spot with, because worker placement spots are not limited to just a single player necessarily. A player can take an already claimed action if their strength is greater than their opponent's. So it turns out that Terramara hits a lot of sweet spots for me. I'm usually a fan of tableau building, and the many different immediate, passive, and end-of-game effects offers up a satisfying amount of strategic possibilities and ensure a lot of variability from one game to the next. Speaking of variability, Terramara also hits that aspect out of the park because of the modular setup and variable player powers. Each game I've played so far has really felt significantly different than the others because of the combination of these things. I'm also impressed that Terramara manages to bring some innovation to as popular a genre as worker placement. The feature actions that players can take is a delicious tactical decision of immediate benefits versus long-term cost. The aging mechanic of the character cards that switches over to a new variable player power is also innovative, and timing that switch just right for maximum effect is an important part of how a game plays out. All things considered, I'm very impressed with Terramara halfway through the year now. It looks very likely that this will wind up on my top 10 of the year list. Obscure Bryce game segment time. This week on the podcast, I'm going to tell you about Love Formula, a card drafting game from publisher Japanime Games, and an uncredited designer in which players are matchmakers trying to set up various couples with the ingredients needed for a perfect date. I've enjoyed most Japanime games that I've played, and the theme of Love Formula is both appealing and unique, so that it stuck out to me amongst the company's offerings. It took a while to come out in English, but I wound up being able to include a copy with my Cowboy Bebop pre-order a few months ago. It didn't take long to hit my table, and I've been able to try it out at both 2 players and 3, which, as we will see, makes a big difference. Here's how it works. In pick-and-pass form, players draft a hand of 12 cards and then wind up playing 10 of them in turns. These cards might be couple cards, which feature a list of criteria to achieve their perfect date. These criteria are gathered by drafting preparation cards, which include the locations and accessories needed for going on the date. At the end of the game, players earn a full amount of points for getting all of the preparation cards dictated by a couple card, or a less value of points for getting just some of them. Each preparation card not assigned anywhere is worth a point as well, and the player who tallies the greatest number of points is the winner, of course. There are also immediate effect cards players can draft to help themselves out with, event cards that will hinder opponents, and defensive cards to protect against take that delivered your way. The game consists of 2 full rounds of drafting 12 and playing 10 cards before the end of the game is triggered. So my first play of the game was a 2-player game, and it wasn't great. There just weren't enough cards seen in order to achieve any of the full amount of points on any of the couple cards that we saw. The pool of cards to work with was just too small, and the experience wound up being disappointing. So my wife and I wrote my oldest son in for a 3-player game, and it worked much better. The extra 24 cards we saw made a huge difference, and we were all able to complete several couple cards. We were also able to use more of the immediate effect, attack, and defensive cards, which made for a more interesting game. Drafting is a good mechanical fit for this theme, but there have to be enough cards to work with to make it work. The 12-card hand size is larger than any other drafting game I've encountered, but it was a necessary design decision for this particular game, though even that large hand size wasn't enough for a 2-player game. I was a little worried that such a large hand size would increase downtime as players debate on which card to keep, but that didn't turn out to be an issue. Once a player has some couples in play, it's an easy decision on which cards to keep an eye out for. Which means the game does seem to play out in a pretty straightforward way. So it's not the most interesting game to play out, but the theme rescues it, and the typically delightful Japanime game's art direction salvages the game as well. So all things considered, it's not a game I think will be worth the time for people not interested in the theme at all. And I certainly wouldn't recommend it at 2, though if I do play at 2 again, I might implement the draw, draft, discard mechanic that some other drafting games implement for 2-player games to increase the quantity of cards seen, and to inject some additional strategic decisions into the game. But for 3 or more players who find the theme appealing, Love Formula is a pleasant diversion and offers up a unique experience as well. We continue my review of the top 5 games ranked on BGG from 5 years ago and comparing them to my own personal top 5 games from 5 years ago to see how they match up with the number ones this episode. The number 1 game of 2015 on BGG is the number 2 ranked game overall, Pandemic Legacy Season 1 from publisher Z-Man and legacy game pioneers and masters Rob Davio and Matt Leacock. It's not on my top 5 of the year list, but I do think it's an amazing game and don't have any issue with it being ranked that highly overall. I own it and I've played through the entire campaign and found it to be a unique and compelling experience. If I didn't have a stack of other Legacy games to play through, I might even consider playing through it again with a different group. But I think it's interesting to look back at the Pandemic Legacy Season 1 and see how it influenced the genre of Legacy games in general. Certainly it made a big splash, and I think the impending Season 3 will be a huge success as well, but the genre does seem to have been a flash in the pan overall. There really aren't that many Legacy games, all things considered, and I'm okay with that. They do require the perfect conjunction of established properties, interested gamers, and committed game group to pull off. Like I said, I've got a stack of them I'm interested in playing through, but it's a stack that is likely to keep me busy for years in the future, and I'm okay with Legacy games just being an infrequent thing. My own personal number 1 game of 2015 is another top 20 of all time for me, Grand Austria Hotel, from publisher Mayfair and designers Virginio Gili and Simone Luciani. In fact, I have it sitting just outside my top 10 at number 11 right now. It was a late in the year release, and I played it 20 times in 2016, and it's been a regular in my rotation ever since. It's one of the few games I've blinged out with the delightful wooden food and drink resources from MeepleSource. A lot of people tell you that this game isn't a good 4-player game, but I like it fine, even at that player count. I just loved everything about the game, and I'm happy to play with any number of players regardless of the amount of time it takes or the occasional downtime between turns. From the strength-based action dice drafting to the tableau building with the staff cards to serving my guests and accommodating them in my hotel in just the perfect way, Grand Austria Hotel is always a joy to play and was an easy choice to be my number 1 game of 2015. Well, that will do it for episode 69. Thanks for listening. Feel free to join the Out of the Dust Podcast Guild at BoardGameGeek.com. Follow the podcast on Twitter at OutOfTheDustBGG. Leave a comment at the Guild. PM me on BGG under user handle Radagast14. Or email me at radagast14@CenturyLink.net. And join the Out of the Dust conversation yourself at our monthly geek list at BGG. Alright, play me out, Tananda!